Welcome to Crossroad Connection. My name is Art Van Walde, and I'm your host for this episode. And it is our privilege today to have with us Jeromy Darling from the Salvage Project. So Jeromy, welcome. Welcome to Crossroad Connection.
Thanks, Art. Thank you very much.
Jeromy, let's begin today by you talking with us a bit about yourself. Who are you and what is the Salvage Project?
Sure. Great questions. Well, I am 34.
Okay.
I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota with my wife, Gretchen. We just celebrated 13 years together. She's the only girlfriend I ever had. We met at 17, okay. And that was it for me. We got married at 21. We've got 2 little boys now, Wyatt and Wilder. Wyatt is 6, Wilder is 3, and both little blonde, brown-eyed boys. They're beautiful, and they just love to party all day long, and they have brought more joy to my life than I ever really expected. So I'm enjoying being a father and husband first. Mm-hmm. And outside of that, I run my charity, the Salvage Project, as a musician and singer-songwriter, and I have the privilege of getting to go around the country and doing concerts for people in some very, very dark places. And it's been a wonderful joy for me to get to take music and use it for more than just entertainment, actually using it in places where people are trying to get well and heal. So that's me in a nutshell. And I attend a church in Minneapolis called The Rock. I'm the music director there. And I helped plant that church in 1999. That's actually where I met my wife, mm-hmm. and where she found Christ.
Talk to us a bit about the Salvage Project. What is it, and how did you come about that name? What is this ministry doing?
Sure. So the Salvage Project is focused on repurposing broken lives through music and, of course, the gospel. And the goal of the Salvage Project really is to take the message of grace and redemption and God's infinite second chances to people in very dark places. So I primarily play in prisons around the country. We've done now 14 states in the last 13 months, or 15 states in the last 13 months. And we've done hospitals, halfway houses, shelters, prisons, all kinds of places. I travel about 5 to 7 days a month. That's as most as I really want to be away from my family. And I don't really feel before the Lord that I want to miss any more church than that. So I kind of plan my travels around our church services and make sure that I'm not gone too long or for too long a stretch of time. So when I'm home, I volunteer doing music around the Twin Cities, playing for people on hospice care, people with AIDS, people with disabilities, people living with dementia, and just anyone in a really sort of dark place or a place of healing. I try and go. So I'm also doing a lot of work now with homeless youth. I run a weekly concert series called Ever Island for homeless and at-risk youth. In the Twin Cities alone, we have on any given night 4,000 to 5,000 kids on the street, sleeping on the street or trying to find a place to sleep. It's an astronomical number. That's really, after that, now it's hard to start counting. It's probably much higher than that. So there's just a tremendous need in the Twin Cities. Statistically, there's also, we're one of the top 15 cities in the country for sex trafficking. There's just a lot of broken people. And frankly, if you look around the country, there's a lot more broken, hurting people by the numbers dealing with abuse or broken families or health problems than there are, normal, happy, everyday people. So really, we look at the life of Christ, and we see he spent all of his time exclusively with the losers and the outcasts and the misfits and the nobodies, the people that society had left behind. And you look at the disciples; they had no business being with someone like Jesus, and here he is walking to the nobodies along the lakes and just reaching out, asking them to be his disciples. Tax collectors, you should be my disciple. He wasn't going into the schools looking for the educated, the successful, the beautiful, the powerful, the athletic, the special. He was looking for the nobodies. And I believe that's who he wants us to spend our time with as well. And I think music, really, for my generation, for all young generations, really is the language. It's the global language. And when you combine a universal language like music with pain, which is the great equalizer, it's amazing what you can communicate in a very short period of time. So for me, it's just been a wonderful combination to get the gospel out and to really touch people's lives.
So part of this ministry, Jeromy, is reaching out into prison. And
Right.
you and I both know that in prison, there's a lot of brokenness.
Yeah.
I mean, it just,
Yeah.
so many hurting people who have had so many things happen to them. They have done a lot of things, they're just hurting. How did
Right.
you get involved in prison ministry? What brought you to that point to go bring your music into prison?
You know, this is something I had been wanting to do for a long time. And in 2008, I got what I called the itch. And I, for some reason, it was probably the Lord's prodding. I really felt like my songs would do well in prison. I don't write a lot of worship songs. The ones I do write, I tend to write in the throes of pain. So they're not necessarily these super happy songs. I tend to write a lot about addiction, abuse, depression, and redemption. And I try and work apologetics. I believe music can be a very powerful way to reason with somebody. So as opposed to being a very overt, you need Jesus, turn or burn kind of music, I really wanted to be a pick and a shovel and an arrow. If you just dig here, you'll find what you're looking for. And I really felt like, again, that calling on my heart to take music to really hurting people, that's where I've always wanted to be. I wanted to be around the hurting, around the broken, around the struggling. And I thought, boy, prisons I think would do really well. I'd do really well in front of that crowd. And so I emailed every chaplain in the state of Minnesota. I did not get a single response.
Oh, wow.
I even sent a gift basket to the department, the head of the Department of Corrections in Minnesota, and it was promptly sent back to me.
I love it.
She was not allowed to accept gifts, which makes sense now. So I consumed the entire contents of the gift basket, licked my wounds, and I thought, well, I should just put this on the shelf for now. So God opened up another door at the time to volunteer regularly at the VA, doing music for disabled veterans. I still do that to this day, and I love it. It's one of my favorite places to go. I was doing that for about 3 years, and in 2011, we had just come out of this massive trial with my little sister. She had been sick for about 6.5 years, and it took almost everything from us and from my family. And in 2009, God finally brought closure to that, brought healing to my sister. My first son was born. Our whole life just kind of came to a head in 2009. And everything turned around. So in 2011, we had begun sort of picking up the pieces and figuring out, well, what are we going to do now that we're through this? And I got that itch again. And I remembered a good friend of mine that I had grown up with. She was sort of what I consider my aunt in the faith. Her name was Betty. I remembered she worked for Prison Fellowship. Betty's a very special woman. Her dad died when she was 21. They were best friends, and then her mom got Alzheimer's, and she spent the next 20 years caring for her mother. Never had a boyfriend during this time, but being married was very big on her heart. So when her mother finally passed, you know, her life kind of changed, and Betty met a guy named Pete. Pete was kind of like my uncle in the faith, and we all went to church together. And Pete was just like her direct opposite in so many ways. He was a very, very wonderful man. And against all odds, they fell in love and got married, and a year later he died playing football with some friends, had a massive heart failure, and he died. And I did not think she would survive that. Pete insisted everyone call her Elizabeth. He thought Betty sounded kind of old, and he treated her like a princess. So I now call her Elizabeth. So she mourned. And she decided that the best way she could carry on his memory, his legacy, was to do what he was doing, which was jail ministry. That was his great passion, jail and prison ministry. So she ended up getting a job with Prison Fellowship and worked in the Twin Cities for a time and did very well. So they sent her down to Florida. And I remembered in 2011, Elizabeth, she works for Prison Fellowship. Maybe she can help me. So I sent her one email, and she had me in literally the next day. I got an email from John Byrne, who's the director of IFI, Interchange Freedom Initiative, which is a prison fellowship offshoot. And he invited me to come in and said, Elizabeth said we should meet, and what she says goes, so why don't you come in and we talk. So I went in for a tour, met some of the guys there. They invited me to come in a week later and do their community service every day at 3 o'clock. They bring all these guys in for community, and they have a teaching and some worship. So I came in, led worship, and did a teaching on, they were going through Romans, the book of Romans, so I did a teaching on Romans, and the guys loved it so much that as soon as I left, they signed a petition, the inmates there.
They wanted you back.
They wanted me back for their graduation ceremony. They have every I think 15 months these guys graduate from the program. They have requested me literally for I think every graduation since that time. And my sister and I have been going as well to the women's prison in Shakopee, doing the same thing there. So that was kind of my in, and for the next 4 years I did it as a volunteer. In 2014, April of 2014, my sister and I were finally able to go and play for the whole prison, the whole women's prison. Normally we just played for that little IFI group, but this night they let me play for the whole prison. Now at the women's prison they separate the group, two different groups. So we played 60 minutes for one group, 60 minutes for another group. And that was where everything really changed for me that night. We played my songs, and we played for about 45 minutes for a group of about 70 women. And by the end of the night, over half the room was just bawling. And a woman right up front there was praying to receive Christ. And I had them all stand up, sing Amazing Grace. And they left. And I sat down. We had about a minute before the next group was going to come in. And I thought, oh my gosh, we've got to do that all over again. And I've got to remember what I said. So sure enough, the women came in, and instantly, you know, you could see kind of why they'd separated these groups of women. This group came in, neck tattoos and shaved heads, just destroyed by life. This second group was interesting, and I looked and I thought in my head, I thought, oh Lord, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through. But just like the first group, song by song, woman by woman, they just started crying. But there was a woman all the way in the back of the room. She had blue eyes, long black hair, very pretty. She was in a row all by herself, and she was holding real strong. She was kind of sitting with her head cocked and her jaw clenched, and she was directly in my line of sight, and I just kept wondering, what did you do to get in here? Because the second group is usually the more difficult group. This prison houses all female offenders, bad check writers to baby killers. They're here. Okay. And this second group was the more hardened offenders. So I just kept wondering, like, how are you? You do not look like you belong here. So we get to the second to last song, which is a song I'll sing here in a little bit, and I started talking about my boys, and I had written this song called In Their Absence, about God's great desire to replace everything in life that you've been denied, to be the mother that you've never had, the father that you've never had, the lover that you've always wanted. And I started talking about my sons and the privilege I have of raising my boys. And just like that, in an instant, there she is in the back. She just grabs her face and she starts bawling. And I was so caught off guard by it that I started crying. And I stepped away from the microphone, and I realized this chorus of sobbing in this room had reached a fever pitch. All but two women were holding their hands and weeping. Like the kind of crying you don't do when someone's watching. And there's a whole room of
This is gut-wrenching cry.
And I sort of panicked, and I thought, oh no, I think I'm going to get kicked out of the room. But it didn't happen. We kind of gathered ourselves. I played the song, shared the gospel, had them stand up and sing Amazing Grace. And it was just an unbelievable moment. But I never forgot that girl. So I went out to my car that night with kind of her face seared in my mind, and I thought, I've got to do this for a living. I can't do this as a volunteer anymore. And that was really the seeds of the Salvage Project that night.
That's an amazing story. And I want to talk with you more about some of the stories of who you've interacted with in prison. But we're going to do that when we come back from break.
Great.
So thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a few moments with Jeromy Darling.
A mother's love is like the rain. It's supposed to clean you up and take away your pain. It's supposed to hold you when the night is all but still. So if your mother will not sing to you, I will. Daddy's hands are like a brick, strong strong enough to rip the thorns out of the thick. They're supposed to carry you when the crowds are all but still. So if your daddy won't protect you, I will. And I will, oh, I will, and I will, oh, I will, and I will. I will love you in their absence. A brother's words are like the wind. They can lift you past the rim. They can push you to the apex of the hill. But if your brother will not stand for you, I will. A sister's heart is warm and bright. It makes you wonder if you've ever seen the night. It shouldn't burn your skin when it touches you, but still, if your sister will not comfort you, I will. And I will, I will, oh, I will, and I will, oh, I will, and I will. I will love you in their absence. A lover's kiss is like a rose. It makes you shiver as it slips beneath your nose. But I am waiting to redeem the heart they steal. And when your lover runs away from you, I will. You shouldn't tear your skin like that. You shouldn't paint your eyes so black. This isn't something that an opiate can kill. And when nobody comes to claim your life, I will. And I will, I will, oh, I will, I will, oh, I will, and I will, oh, I will, and I will. I will love you in the absence. I will love you in the absence of love.
Welcome back to this episode of Crossroad Connection, and today we have Jeromy Darling with us, and we're having a wonderful time talking about the Salvage Project and music, and how God uses music to touch people's hearts. And Jeromy, let's talk a bit more about some of the stories of people that God has used your music to impact them.
Sure. So after that night, I went back and I had a conversation with my dad, and I said, you need to help me get out of my job here and do this. I can't keep going back to work knowing these opportunities are out here. I can't care about my job anymore. We began talking about starting a ministry, a nonprofit, and I think it was in May or June I got an email from him. My dad gets up at about 3:30 in the morning. He emailed me, he said, I think you ought to call it the Salvage Project, repurposing broken lives. And I was like, I can't improve that at all. So that night we began, that day we began the seedlings of the Salvage Project. I found a dear friend I met very randomly. He filed all my paperwork for free, which is a huge blessing. And that fall, September, we started our first tour. We went to Indianapolis and did 7 shows in about 70 hours. We do 2 or 3 shows per day. Prison shelters, halfway houses. I don't want to waste any time, when I'm on the road. So for the next year, really, we were just, me and my band, state after state, city after city. And just this last April, a year after that experience at the women's prison,
Yes.
I drove up to about 50 miles northern Minnesota to a little house where a couple runs a jail ministry called MEC, Missionary Evangelism to Corrections. A great program, they go into jails. I went in and sat down, and this really wonderful, sweet couple, and these two older gentlemen were there to volunteer. And then a woman came in and sat down, and she was going to volunteer as well. So it's the four of us there and this couple. So the gal that sort of runs this, her name was Karen. She said, well, why don't you guys share your testimony? So one by one, each person was sharing their story, and it got to this woman, and she began to tell just one of the most harrowing testimonies I had ever heard. Grew up in a very abusive home. She and her mother were abused by her father. And 14, they finally ran away in the night, and her mother went right to another abusive relationship. She was abused by her mom's boyfriend, so she went back to her dad. Of course, that was a mess. So finally, she ran away at 15 and was emancipated from her parents. Ended up in a series of exclusively abusive relationships for the next 15 years, had a couple of kids. She now has her third child, a 2-year-old boy. She leaves the guy she's with for a younger guy who's a drug addict. One day she goes to work, comes back, and finds her 2-year-old beaten into a coma by her boyfriend. She's arrested for negligence, criminal negligence, and while she's in jail, her son died. She ended up at the Shakopee Women's Prison, got out a year early. She is now at a homeless shelter, working part-time, and she said, I just want to love people. That's my story. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in the couch just crying now, thinking, my gosh, what an unbelievably difficult life. And I looked at her with tears in my eyes. I said, it's stories like yours that have me doing what I'm doing. I said, in fact, just a year ago, this week, I was at the women's prison with my sister. We did a concert there, and that's really the night that changed things for me, and she smiled.
She was the lady in the back?
I leaned forward and I said, were you there that night? And she said, yeah, I was there. And I looked closer. I said, were you in the first or second group? She said, I was in the second group. And I looked at her and I realized she had blue eyes and long black hair. I said, were you in the back, all by yourself? And just like last time, she grabbed her face and she started sobbing. And all the air went out of the room as we all realized, that I had known her. Now, they didn't know this story. They didn't know this woman. I had talked about this woman almost every day. I had used her image seared into my brain as kind of the inspiration for the Salvage Project, and now she's sitting right in front of me. I was so overwhelmed. She just got up and she walked out of the room. Karen graciously met her in the kitchen and they embraced, and I looked at the guys. They're both in tears, and I thought, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm rarely at loss for words. So I stood up and I walked into the kitchen and I said, I remember your face. You were the girl that looked like she didn't belong there.
Now you knew how
she
talking
got
about
in
your
there.
sons and all
Yeah.
that, how that just cut her.
I mean, she was still carrying her son's ashes in a necklace. And so I gave her a hug, and I knew, she had been uniquely damaged by men. And I really believe in our society, non-sexual touch is very powerful. Jesus was not afraid to touch people, the leper, right? He could have healed the leper any other way, but he said he touched him. He didn't have to touch him to heal him, but he did. So we sat back in the living room, and Karen graciously excused everyone for 10 minutes to sort of take a breather, and I sat next to her, and I just said, could we just pray? Because I don't know what to do right now. I'm so overwhelmed that of the mathematical improbabilities that you would have gotten out early, found Christ, that we would have been here on this day, a year later, almost to the day. It's just unbelievable.
Only God does things like that.
She said, you have no idea the lives you touched that night. I said, I'm sure I don't. One day, maybe I will, but I'm sure I don't. And so we prayed and wept, and state by state, we've heard these stories, city by city. Nary a concert we've left where someone wasn't crying. And what's amazing is, recently we were playing an outdoor concert, doing some songs, and an old man comes up, and at the end of the concert, he came up and he handed me a check for $100, asked for a CD, gave him a CD, and he's bawling. He wouldn't even look at me in the eye. I said, are you okay? He said, your music's just very powerful. And he walked away. He wouldn't let me talk to him. He showed up 2 weeks later, another concert of mine, and got to hear his story. and talk more with them. But then, rewind a little bit. Last January, we're playing for a bunch of youth at a little music club in Ohio, and there's a 15-year-old girl sitting right up front just bawling. We played for a bunch of gangbangers at a rehabilitation center in Ohio, and they went crazy. It doesn't, music, pain, that language, it doesn't matter what age you are. If you've been through pain, or care about someone who's been through pain, when you put those things together, it's amazing the lives you can touch. It does not matter the genre. And that's really been my goal, was to sort of get past all the genres, all the entertainment. We live in the most oversexed, over-entertained society in the history of time. I don't care about the rich. Jesus let the rich man walk away. I'd let him walk away. You can have your pop stars and you're happy with your life. One day it'll come crumbling down. I just want to go where the people are hurting, and I mean, it would take hours to go through those kinds of stories, but it's unbelievable. And also, and I need prayer for this. I try not to carry those things because there's a lot of, even just recently, the things that are done to people and the stories that I've heard. They're there now with me for the rest of my life, and it's taken me great discipline to not bring those things home with me and not carry them around.
It's amazing when you leave settings like prison and you hear the stories, what has been done and what has transpired in people's lives. It does. It hurts you.
Boy, Art, I tell you what.
You carry it, you don't forget it.
Yeah, and here's the dichotomy. You go into these prisons, and I don't know what these guys have done. I know some of these men have raped and killed. So the dichotomy is that I'm coming in knowing if you got a pulse, God wants your soul. That's why I'm here. But as far as I'm concerned, you can spend the rest of your life in prison. But I want you to get saved. But you got to pay your time here on earth. But your soul can be spared judgment. And that's why I'm here. It's a very strange thing to walk in, understanding the kind of men you're dealing with. Everybody puts on a great face for the musician. They all want the musician to like them. And so they're all, on their best behavior. And I want them to feel my care for them. But, you're shaking hands with some very dangerous men that have done some very bad things, but have also had bad things done to them. And women's prisons are even worse. At least 80% of these women have been victimized. So it's something you want to keep in your mind, understand that they desperately need what only Christ can offer.
Jeromy, I know people are listening to your story, listening to what is transpiring in this ministry, the Salvage Project. And I know people who are listening today, they're going to want to find out more information.
Yeah.
So how can they find out more information about the Salvage Project? And you have a website?
Yeah, you can go to thesalvageproject.org.
Okay.
And there's quite a bit of information there. There's more links for my music and what I'm doing. That's a great place to find out where we've been. We've got a lot on tap. In the last year, we've been able to share the gospel with 2,000 people, very, very hurting people. I'd like to double that in the next year is my goal.
Well, Jeromy, thank you for coming. It's been a joy. It's just amazing to me to hear how the Holy Spirit worked and brought a lady to your life again. And that's a powerful story.
There's a lot of stories like that. I'm very grateful, and I don't deserve the opportunities God's given me. I recognize that, so I'm just trying not to waste it.
Well, God's blessings. And to those who are listening on Crossroad Bible Institute, we thank you for listening, and God's blessings in the rest of your day.